The morning sun cast long shadows across the training facility as Sarah Chun adjusted her grip on the rifle for what felt like the 100th time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold mountain air, but from the weight of knowing that every elite sniper in the program was watching her. At 22, she was the youngest recruit ever accepted into the Mountain Division's advanced sniper training, and everyone expected her to fail. Sarah had grown up in a small farming town where hunting was a way of life. Her father, a former military man himself, had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle properly. What started as weekend trips to hunt deer had evolved into something far more serious when Sarah discovered she had an almost supernatural ability to read wind patterns and judge distances. Her shots were so consistently accurate that local hunters began asking her father if his daughter was some kind of prodigy. The path to this moment had been anything but easy. After high school, Sarah had enlisted in the Army with dreams of serving her country, but she never imagined she would find herself here, surrounded by hardened veterans with years of combat experience. Most of the other trainees had been handpicked from Special Forces units, while Sarah had been recruited directly from basic training after her instructors noticed her exceptional marksmanship scores. The training facility was nestled high in the Rocky Mountains, where the thin air and unpredictable weather conditions created the perfect environment for pushing snipers to their limits. The program was designed to break people, to separate those who could handle the mental and physical demands of precision shooting under extreme stress from those who simply had good aim at shooting range. Over the past 6 weeks, Sarah had watched as seasoned soldiers packed their bags and left after failing to meet the rigorous standards. Sergeant Major Rodriguez, the head instructor, had made it clear from day one that he didn't think Sarah belonged there. He questioned whether someone so young and inexperienced could handle the psychological pressure that came with the job. During their first meeting, he had looked her up and down with obvious skepticism and said that marksmanship was only 10% of being a successful sniper. The other 90% was mental toughness, patience, and the ability to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure. The other trainees had been polite but distant, treating Sarah more like a curious novelty than a serious competitor. She understood their skepticism. While they shared stories of combat deployments and dangerous missions, Sarah's most intense experience had been winning a local shooting competition. She knew she had to prove herself not just as a marksman, but as someone who belonged among the military's elite. The previous weeks had been a blur of classroom instruction, physical conditioning, and increasingly difficult shooting exercises. Sarah had performed well on the technical aspects, learning about ballistics, weather reading, and equipment maintenance. Her scores on the standard shooting tests had been consistently high, often matching or exceeding those of her more experienced classmates. But everyone knew that the real test was still to come. The instructors had been building up to this moment for weeks, dropping hints about a final exercise that would separate the true snipers from the merely skilled shooters. Rumors circulated among the trainees about previous years' final tests, each story more intimidating than the last. Some said it involved shooting in complete darkness. Others claimed it required hitting targets while under simulated enemy fire. The uncertainty was part of the psychological pressure. Sarah spent her evenings studying topographical maps and weather patterns, trying to prepare for whatever challenge lay ahead. She practiced her breathing exercises and visualization techniques, knowing that mental preparation would be just as important as physical skill. Her roommate, Lisa, a former Marine with 3 combat deployments, had initially been dismissive of Sarah's chances but had gradually warmed to her determination and work ethic. The night before the final exercise, Sarah barely slept. She lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and running through every technique she had learned. The facility was unusually quiet, as if even the mountain itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Sarah thought about her father and the pride in his eyes when she told him about being accepted into the program. She thought about the doubt she had seen in Sergeant Major Rodriguez's face and her determination to prove him wrong. When morning came, the trainees were assembled before dawn in the main briefing room. The atmosphere was tense, with nervous energy crackling between the 12 remaining candidates. Sarah noticed that even the most confident veterans seemed on edge, checking and rechecking their equipment with unusual attention to detail. She forced herself to stay calm, remembering her father's advice that nervousness was just excitement without proper breathing. Sergeant Major Rodriguez entered the room with his usual stern expression, but Sarah caught something different in his demeanor. There was an intensity that suggested today would be unlike anything they had experienced so far. He stood at the front of the room for a long moment, his eyes scanning each trainee's face as if measuring their readiness for what was to come. The briefing began with a detailed explanation of the mission parameters. They would be transported to a remote location high in the mountains, where each sniper would be given a single target at an extreme distance. The catch was that they would have only one shot to hit the target, and the distance would be unlike anything they had attempted before. Failure meant immediate dismissal from the program, regardless of previous performance. As the details were revealed, Sarah felt her heart rate increase. The target would be placed at 7,000 meters, a distance that pushed the absolute limits of both equipment and human capability. At that range, factors like the Earth's rotation, air density, and minute wind variations could throw off even the most perfectly aimed shot. It wasn't just about marksmanship anymore. It was about understanding and accounting for dozens of variables that could influence the bullet's path over such an extreme distance. The equipment they would use was the most advanced available, but even the best rifle and scope in the world couldn't compensate for human error at 7,000 meters. Sarah had never attempted a shot at anything close to that distance, and she could see from the expressions around her that even the most experienced snipers were feeling the weight of the challenge. The transportation to the shooting location took over an hour, winding through mountain roads that climbed steadily higher into terrain that seemed almost alien in its rugged beauty. Sarah used the time to center herself, practicing the meditation techniques she had learned from her father during their hunting trips. She focused on her breathing and tried to quiet the voice in her head that whispered doubts about her ability to succeed. When they finally reached the shooting position, Sarah was struck by the sheer scale of the landscape before them. The target zone was visible in the distance as a tiny speck against the mountainside, so far away that it seemed almost theoretical. The thin mountain air made every breath feel inadequate, and Sarah knew that altitude would add another layer of complexity to an already impossible shot. The other snipers spread out along the shooting line, each taking their assigned position with methodical precision. Sarah found herself in position number 7, between two veterans whose calm confidence she tried to absorb through proximity. She began setting up her equipment with the same careful attention to detail she had practiced hundreds of times, but her hands moved with a steadiness that surprised even her. As she adjusted her scope and checked her calculations, Sarah realized that something had shifted inside her. The nervousness that had plagued her for weeks was gone, replaced by a clarity of purpose that felt almost supernatural. She understood that this moment was what all her training had been building toward, and she was ready to prove that youth and determination could compete with experience and reputation. The wind at this elevation was unpredictable, shifting directions and intensity with frustrating irregularity. Sarah spent long minutes studying the vegetation between her position and the target, looking for clues about wind patterns at different elevations. She made careful notes about temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure, knowing that each factor would influence her bullet's trajectory over the enormous distance. Sergeant Major Rodriguez moved down the line, checking each sniper's preparation and offering final guidance. When he reached Sarah's position, he paused longer than he had with the others. She could feel his skeptical gaze as he examined her setup and calculations, looking for any sign that she was in over her head. Instead of discouragement, his scrutiny only strengthened her resolve. The moment of truth was approaching, And Sarah knew that everything she had worked for would be decided by a single shot across 7,000 meters of mountain wilderness. The elite snipers around her represented the best the military had to offer, but she was determined to prove that sometimes being a rookie could be an advantage. With fresh eyes and an unshakable belief in her abilities, she prepared to take the shot that would either make her career or end her dreams before they truly began. The order to begin came through their radio headsets like a thunderclap. Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense as she settled into her final shooting position. Around her, the other snipers were making their last-minute adjustments, their movements deliberate and practiced. The silence that followed was broken only by the whisper of wind across the mountain peaks and the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. Sarah pressed her eye to the scope and found her target through the powerful optics. At 7,000 meters, even with maximum magnification, the target appeared as little more than a dark smudge against the rocky mountainside. She had studied the photographs during the briefing, memorizing every detail of the small metal plate that would determine her fate, but seeing it at this distance drove home the impossibility of what they were attempting. The mathematics of the shot were staggering. Her bullet would travel for nearly 8 seconds before reaching the target, giving the wind ample time to push it off course. The projectile would arc high into the thin mountain air before beginning its descent, and she had to account for a drop of over 400 feet. Even the rotation of the Earth would influence the bullet's path over such an extreme distance, requiring adjustments that pushed the limits of her training. Sarah began her calculations methodically, using every technique she had learned over the past weeks. She studied the wind indicators she could see through her scope, noting how the grass and small shrubs moved at various points along the bullet's projected path. The wind was coming primarily from her left, but she could see evidence of crosswinds and updrafts that would complicate her calculations significantly. The temperature had dropped several degrees since they arrived at the shooting position, and Sarah knew that the cold air would affect her bullet's velocity and trajectory. She made careful adjustments to her scope settings, working through complex ballistic calculations in her head while trying to maintain the calm focus that accurate shooting demanded. Every variable had to be considered, because at this distance, the smallest error would result in a complete miss. Position 3 fired first, the sharp crack of the rifle echoing across the valley. Through her peripheral vision, Sarah saw the sniper maintain his position, waiting for the spotting call that would tell him whether his shot had found its mark. The radio crackled with static before the range officer's voice confirmed what everyone suspected: miss, low, and left. The first elite sniper had failed, and the psychological pressure on the remaining shooters increased immediately. Sarah forced herself to block out the failure of her teammate and continued her own preparations. She had learned from her father that successful hunting required the ability to stay focused on your own shot, regardless of what was happening around you. She applied the same principle now, treating this as just another hunt, albeit one where the stakes were higher than any deer she had ever pursued. Position 4 fired next, followed quickly by Position 5. Both shots missed their targets, and Sarah could feel the tension building along the shooting line. These were supposed to be the best snipers in the military, men with years of combat experience and countless successful missions. If they were failing at this distance, what chance did a rookie have? The doubt tried to creep back into Sarah's mind, but she pushed it away with an almost physical effort. She remembered the hours of practice she had put in, the countless shots she had taken in all kinds of weather conditions. She thought about the natural ability that had first gotten her noticed, the instinctive understanding of ballistics that her instructors had called exceptional. This was her moment to prove that talent and determination could overcome experience. Position 6, the sniper directly to her left, took an unusually long time to prepare his shot. Sarah could see him making repeated adjustments to his scope, clearly struggling with the wind calculations that were giving everyone trouble. When he finally fired, the wait for the spotting call seemed to stretch on forever before the radio delivered another miss. 4 attempts, 4 failures. The target at 7,000 meters was proving to be as impossible as it had seemed. Sarah's turn had arrived. She settled deeper into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of the rifle stock against her shoulder. Her breathing slowed naturally as she entered the mental zone that had served her well throughout training. Through her scope, the distant target seemed to pulse with each beat of her heart, and she knew she had a timer shot perfectly between heartbeats to achieve the steadiness she needed. The wind had shifted slightly in the past few minutes, and Sarah made a final adjustment to her scope settings. She had been watching the vegetation throughout the morning, learning the patterns of air movement across the valley. There was a rhythm to it, a cycle of gusts and lulls that she had begun to understand on an almost subconscious level. She waited for the right moment in the wind cycle, knowing that patience was often the difference between success and failure. Her father had taught her to trust her instincts when hunting, to let her natural abilities guide the shot rather than overthinking every variable. The advice seemed particularly relevant now, as Sarah realized that she had done all the calculations she could do. The rest would depend on factors beyond her complete control, requiring a leap of faith in her own abilities that went beyond textbook knowledge. Sarah controlled her breathing, taking slow, measured breaths as she waited for the perfect moment to fire. The crosshairs of her scope danced slightly with each heartbeat, but she maintained the steady hold that her training had made second nature. She could feel the eyes of her instructors and fellow trainees on her, but the external pressure seemed to fade away as she focused entirely on the shot. The moment felt right. The wind had momentarily calmed, her breathing was perfectly controlled, and the crosshairs were steady on target. Sarah applied pressure to the trigger with the same smooth motion she had practiced thousands of times, feeling the familiar resistance as the mechanism engaged. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, and Sarah maintained her position to watch the bullet's impact through her scope. 8 seconds had never felt so long. Sarah watched through her scope as her bullet traced its invisible path across the vast distance, knowing that the laws of physics were now in complete control of her fate. The projectile was traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, but over 7,000 meters, even that incredible velocity required time that seemed to stretch on forever. The radio crackled to life, and Sarah held her breath as she waited for the spotting call. The range officer's voice cut through the mountain air with startling clarity. Position 7, target hit, center mass. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before their meaning fully registered. Sarah had done the impossible. Her first shot at 7,000 meters had found its mark while 4 experienced snipers had failed. The silence that followed was broken by a low whistle from one of the other snipers, followed by murmured comments of disbelief and respect. Sarah remained in position, hardly daring to believe what she had just accomplished. Through her scope, she could see the small hole in the target that confirmed her success, but the achievement seemed almost surreal. Sergeant Major Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with an undertone she had never heard before. There was respect in his words as he called for Sarah to maintain her position while the remaining snipers completed their attempts. The pressure of being watched had intensified dramatically, but now it was tinged with a new kind of attention. She was no longer the rookie who didn't belong. She was the sniper who had succeeded where veterans had failed. The remaining 5 snipers took their shots over the next hour, but the psychological impact of Sarah's success seemed to affect their performance. 2 more managed to hit their targets, but their shots lacked the precision of Sarah's center mass impact. The others missed entirely, victims of the extreme distance and challenging conditions that had claimed the first 4 shooters. When the exercise finally concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by her fellow trainees and instructors, all wanting to understand how she had achieved what seemed impossible. The skeptical looks she had endured for weeks had been replaced by expressions of genuine respect and curiosity. Even the veterans who had initially dismissed her were now eager to learn from her techniques and insights. The technical analysis of her shot would come later, but Sarah already knew that she had accomplished something special. At 7,000 meters, with challenging wind conditions and enormous pressure, she had proven that natural ability combined with determination could achieve results that experience alone couldn't guarantee. The rookie who wasn't supposed to belong had just redefined what was possible in the world of elite military sniping. As they prepared to return to the training facility, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a small farming town to the top of the mountain, proving herself among the military's best, she had followed a path that seemed impossible just months earlier. But the shot itself was only the beginning. She knew that her real career as an elite sniper was just starting, and this success will be the foundation for everything that came next. The return journey to the training facility was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her weeks in the program. The same veterans who had barely acknowledged her presence now sought her out, asking detailed questions about her shooting technique and mental preparation. The transformation in their attitudes was complete, and Sarah found herself at the center of conversations that would have been unimaginable just hours earlier. Sergeant Major Rodriguez sat across from her during the helicopter ride back, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed the data from her shot. The ballistic computers had confirmed what everyone had witnessed. Her bullet had traveled 7,042 meters and struck the target within 2 inches of the center. The precision was remarkable under any circumstances, but for a rookie attempting her first shot at extreme distance, it bordered on the impossible. The news of Sarah's achievement spread quickly through the military sniper community. By the time they reached the base, word had already traveled to training facilities across the country and even to deployed units overseas. A rookie hitting a 7,000-meter target on her first attempt was the kind of story that would be discussed in sniper circles for years to come, and Sarah found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never expected or wanted. The debriefing session that evening was unlike any of the routine after-action reviews Sarah had attended. Instead of the usual critique of techniques and suggestions for improvement, the instructors were genuinely curious about her approach to the impossible shot. They wanted to understand not just what she had done, but how she had developed the instincts that allowed her to succeed where experienced snipers had failed. Sarah tried to explain her thought process, but she found it difficult to articulate something that had felt so natural in the moment. She described how she had watched the wind patterns for hours, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated air movement at different elevations. She talked about the breathing techniques her father had taught her and the mental visualization exercises she had developed over years of hunting. But even as she spoke, she knew that the words couldn't fully capture the intuitive understanding that had guided her shot. The other trainees listened with intense focus, taking notes and asking follow-up questions about details that seemed insignificant but might hold the key to replicating her success. Sarah realized that her achievement had changed the dynamics of the training program in ways that went far beyond her own advancement. She had become a case study, an example of what was possible when natural ability was combined with proper training and unwavering determination. The graduation ceremony 3 days later was attended by senior officers who rarely made appearances at routine training events. Sarah's success had drawn attention from the highest levels of military command, and there was talk of fast-tracking her into specialized units that normally required years of experience. The possibilities that lay ahead were exciting, but also overwhelming for someone who had been focused simply on completing the program. Sarah's assignment to her first operational unit came with unprecedented opportunities. Instead of the typical deployment to a standard infantry division, she was offered a position with an elite reconnaissance team that operated in some of the world's most challenging environments. The unit's commander had specifically requested her after reviewing the documentation of her 7,000-meter shot, believing that her unique skills could provide capabilities that no amount of experience could replicate. The transition from training to operational deployment happened quickly. Within weeks of graduation, Sarah found herself in a remote forward operating base, preparing for missions that would test every skill she had developed. The veterans in her new unit treated her with a respect that had been earned through performance rather than rank or experience, and she quickly discovered that her reputation had preceded her to this distant corner of the world. Her first operational mission came sooner than expected. Intelligence had identified a high-value target operating from a compound in mountainous terrain that provided natural protection from conventional assault. The distance to the target exceeded the capabilities of standard sniper equipment, but Sarah's demonstrated ability at extreme range made her the obvious choice for what military planners called a one-shot mission. The preparation for this real-world application of her skills was more intense than anything she had experienced in training. The stakes were no longer academic. Success or failure would have consequences that extended far beyond her own career. The target was a known terrorist leader whose elimination could save countless innocent lives, but the shot would have to be taken under combat conditions with no second chances. The mission team spent days studying satellite imagery and weather patterns, developing detailed plans that accounted for every variable they could identify. Sarah's input was sought on technical aspects that previous missions had never had to consider, and she found herself helping to pioneer tactics that would become standard for extreme-range operations. The combination of her natural abilities and cutting-edge technology was creating possibilities that had never existed before. The infiltration to the shooting position took 3 days of careful movement through hostile territory. Sarah's team had to avoid enemy patrols while carrying the specialized equipment needed for the shot, including a custom rifle system that had been modified specifically for extreme-range work. The weapon represented the pinnacle of military technology, but Sarah knew that all the engineering in the world couldn't compensate for human error at the distances they were attempting. When they finally reached the designated shooting position, Sarah was struck by the similarity to the training scenario that had launched her career. The target was visible through high-powered optics as a tiny figure moving occasionally across the compound courtyard, nearly 8,000 meters away. The shot would be even more challenging than her training success, complicated by the need for absolute stealth and the knowledge that failure could compromise the entire mission. Sarah spent hours studying the target area, learning the patterns of activity that might give her the best opportunity for a successful shot. The terrorist leader appeared to follow a routine that brought him into the open at predictable times, but the windows of opportunity were brief and required split-second timing. She would have to account for his movement, as well as all the ballistic factors that made extreme-range shooting so difficult. The moment of truth came on the second day of observation. Intelligence confirmed that the target would be in the compound for only a few more hours before moving to a location that would be impossible to reach. Sarah had one chance to complete the mission that had brought her team across thousands of miles of dangerous territory. The pressure was enormous, but she found the same calm focus that had served her during training. The shot itself felt familiar despite the dramatically different circumstances. Sarah applied all the techniques she had learned, reading the wind patterns and calculating the countless variables that would influence her bullet over the extreme distance. When a moment felt right, she fired with the same smooth trigger control that had made her famous in training, watching through her scope as the bullet began its long journey to the target. The impact was confirmed by both visual observation and intelligence intercepts that revealed the chaos her shot had created in the enemy compound. The terrorist leader had been eliminated with surgical precision, and the mission that conventional forces would have required days to complete had been accomplished with a single bullet fired from an impossible distance. The success of the mission established Sarah as one of the military's most valuable assets for specialized operations. Her ability to engage targets at ranges that exceeded normal capabilities opened up tactical possibilities that commanders had never considered before. She had proven that the combination of natural talent, rigorous training, and advanced technology could achieve results that redefined the limits of what was possible. Word of the successful mission spread through military channels with the same speed that news of her training achievement had traveled months earlier. Sarah found herself in demand for operations that required her unique skills, and she began to understand that her career would be unlike anything she had originally envisioned. She was no longer just a sniper. She was a strategic asset whose capabilities could influence the outcome of critical missions. The young woman who had been dismissed as too inexperienced for elite sniper training had become one of the most respected marksmen in the military. Her journey from rookie to legend had taken less than a year, but the skills and determination she had displayed would influence military tactics for decades to come. Sarah Chun had proven that sometimes being a rookie could be the greatest advantage of all, bringing fresh perspectives and unlimited potential to a profession that valued experience above all else. As she prepared for her next assignment, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her from a small farming town to the pinnacle of military sniping. The shot that had made her famous was just the beginning of a career that would continue to push the boundaries of what was possible. She had learned that success came not from following the expected path, but from having the courage to prove that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. The elite snipers who had once doubted her abilities now studied her techniques, hoping to understand the instincts that had made her successful. Sarah's story had become an inspiration for recruits who came from unconventional backgrounds, proving that determination and natural ability could overcome any obstacle. The rookie who had shocked everyone with a single shot at 7,000 meters had changed the world of military sniping forever, and her legend would continue to grow with each new mission she completed.